Hi, so in this video I'm going to talk to you about compression. What is a compressor? What does it do? And how do you actually use one properly? So I've got a drum break here. I'm just going to play that for you just very quickly. Let's say I want to put a compressor on that. Well, the first question is, why do I want to compress that? Compressors reduce the difference in level between the loudest parts of the signal and the quietest parts. They compact the energy in the signal and make things sound tight, punchy, and solid. So that's the why I want to compress the signal. So I've got this compressor. It's on this drum break channel. And the first thing I'm going to do, as I do every time I use a compressor, is I start with some initial settings which allow me to hear clearly what every change I make does. So before I get into that, I'm going to explain very quickly, for those of you who don't know, what the controls of a compressor do. We'll start with the threshold. Now, the threshold determines the level at which the compressor kicks in. So think of it as a line. This is your signal. As soon as your signal crosses that line, compression kicks in. Attack. So once the signal has crossed that line, how long does it take before the compression kicks in? The attack determines how long that takes. The ratio determines how much compression there actually is. So the ratio determines once the signals cross the threshold, the attack determines how long it takes before the compression starts to act, and the ratio determines how much compression there actually is. The release is, I guess, almost like the reverse of the attack. So it determines once the signal has crossed the threshold, the attack determines how long it takes before compression kicks in, the ratio determines how much compression, and the release determines how long it holds the signal in a state of compression for before letting go of the compression. So now we know basically what these four controls do. I'll explain to you how I set my compressor up every time as a great starting point for getting great results every single time. I start with the attack as fast as it will go. I turn the ratio up to pretty much full, 10 to 1, 20 to 1. Or thereabouts. The release, I set that as fast as it will go, and I set the threshold so that all of the signal is getting compressed. Now let's just hear that drum break without the compression, and I'm going to put the compressor on, and then I'm going to explain why I use these settings as a starting point. So you can hear that with these settings as a starting point, the signal is very, very heavily compressed. What this actually does is, starting at this point actually allows us to hear clearly any change we make. For example, if I adjust the attack setting now, you'll hear very, very clearly what it's doing. The slower the attack, the more of the initial transients, the more of the initial attack of that sound is going to come through, and the fatter it will sound. So if, for example, with a drum break, the slower the attack, the more of the stick hitting the skin you're going to hear. And if it's a guitar string, for example, the thicker that guitar string will sound. So I'm just going to play this drum break and dial this attack and let you hear what it's actually doing. Once you've got your attack roughly to where you want it, we'll set the release so that it grooves with the track, with the breakbeat, with whatever instrument you're applying compression to. I'll just play that and dial the release and let you hear exactly what that's doing. So once we've got the release in the ballpark, we'll dial the ratio back to a more sensible setting. Now, a ratio of 2 to 1 is considered moderate compression. a ratio of 4:1 or 6:1 is considered medium compression. And compression ratios of 10:1 up to 20:1 are considered quite heavy compression. Anything above 20:1, and we're getting into limiting territory there. I'll do another video all about limiters, but for now, let's stick to compression. So I've got the attack roughly where I want it. I've got the release roughly where I want it. I'm going to adjust the ratio now so it sounds a bit more natural and not so heavily compressed. So for this particular drum break, I'm going for a ratio of 3:1. Now I might tweak these settings a little bit later on, but for now we're in the ballpark. And the next thing to do is adjust the threshold so that only the loudest parts of the signal are getting compressed. So somewhere around there. As I say, from that starting point, you can see that I very, very quickly found the attack that I wanted, found the release setting that I wanted, set the ratio to where I wanted it, and I've got the threshold in the ballpark of where I want that. So these can all be tweaked later on, but this is a very, very fast and efficient method, a great starting point for getting the compression results that you want very quickly and consistently. No more fiddling around with the dials, wondering and accidentally hitting upon a compression setting, and then the next time you want to compress something, you're wondering how you did that. So just to recap, set the attack to its fastest, set the release to its fastest, set the ratio to pretty high, 10:1, 20:1, set the threshold so that all of the signal is getting compressed, and then tweak from there. Now I've got the attack, ratio, release and threshold in the ballpark of where I want them. The next thing I'm going to do is just give them a little tweak, make sure I'm happy, and then I'm going to use parallel compression, which is a simple trick. It's essentially blending in the dry signal with the compressed signal to whatever extent. It works really, really well. With some compressors, you have a mix control that allows you to dial that in easily. Sometimes you have to duplicate the channel, copy the compressor that you've got onto that channel and change the settings and reduce the amount of compression so it's very, very lightly compressed, and then blend your heavily compressed channel in with that. Let's just play that and have a listen. Let's tweak the controls now and blend that in with the dry signal. So I'm just going to A/B that, and you can hear the difference between the uncompressed signal and the compressed signal that I've used a little bit of parallel compression on too. And as you can hear, the original dry, uncompressed signal sounds a bit flat, a little bit lifeless, and the compressed signal has got more energy to it. It sounds a bit tighter, it's more solid, and it's punchier. So now I want to talk a little bit about the knee setting on a compressor. Now, some compressors have a knee setting, and you might be wondering what that is and what it does. On this particular compressor, there's 3 settings. There's hard, medium, and soft. I'm just going to talk about the 2 extremes there, hard and soft knee compression. So with hard knee compression, once the signal crosses the threshold and compression kicks in, the attack has determined how long it takes after it's crossed the threshold before the compression kicks in. With hard knee compression, when it does kick in, it kicks in abruptly. Hard knee compression is usually pretty good for percussive sounds, drums, that kind of thing. And with soft knee compression, this works a little bit differently. So as the signal approaches the threshold, the ratio begins to increase until when your signal has crossed the threshold, the ratio has increased to a point where it's reached whatever setting you've chosen here. So if you'd set 4:1, after it's crossed the threshold, it will reach 4:1. So once the signal has crossed the threshold, hard knee compression is engaged abruptly. Soft knee compression, as the signal approaches the threshold, the ratio increases until it reaches the point that you've set here on the compressor. Once it crosses the threshold, you're already at that point, whatever setting you've chosen, 4:1, 3:1, whatever it is. So that's essentially hard knee and soft knee compression. This particular compression has got this left-right link. So what this does is it determines whether the compressor on a stereo channel works independently on the left and right channels or on both of them simultaneously. And with this particular one, you can determine to what extent it works on both of them or to what extent they're independent. So just to recap on those initial settings that allow you to hear exactly what you're doing with each control: set the attack to the fastest, the ratio to full, the release to its fastest, the threshold so that the entire signal is getting compressed. If you have a mixed control on your compressor, just make sure it's 100%. Then you play your track and dial in the attack that you want. Set the release time so that the signal is released from a state of compression. I usually do this to groove with the track. Set the ratio to something more natural sounding, 4:1, 3:1, 2:1, good for most sounds. And then set the threshold so that only the loudest part of the signal is getting compressed. And one final thing, make sure you check your input levels and your output levels throughout the whole process from the beginning to the end. Make sure you've got good healthy input gain, no clipping. Make sure you've got good healthy output gain, no clipping. Allow headroom. I'll cover gain staging in another video. Subscribe below if you liked this video. There's going to be plenty more coming on all kinds of topics: compression, EQ, phase, and much, much more. Thanks for watching. See you soon.